As to the nations listed in verses 3 through 7, these can be broken down into three essential groupings. 1. Persia, Cush, and Put. 2. Gomer, and all her hordes, along with Beth Togarmah at the recesses of the north, and all her hordes. And 3. A host of allied nations. As to the first group, these nations are representative of the south and specifically of the three regional powers of the Southern Alliance, now subject to the beast, that is, 3 of the 10 horns that form the revived Roman Empire. Persia may be taken to represent Iran and the Central Asian power center, Turkey to Kazakhstan. Put refers to Libya and represents North Africa Kush. In biblical terms usually refers to Ethiopia, but sometimes also to Mesopotamia. Compare Cush, the father of Nimrod, who operated in that region, Genesis 10:8. And in our context, probably has both meanings, referring to the arc of southern kingdoms from Ethiopia and Sudan across the Red Sea and into Arabia and Iraq. Egypt is notably missing from this description, no doubt because as the head of the Southern Alliance, she suffered especially grievously at the hands of Antichrist after their defeat. For I will spur on Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight one against his brother, and another against his friend, a city against a city, and a kingdom against a kingdom, that is, the splintering of the triple coalition. And Egypt's spirit will be emptied from the midst of her, for I will confound her plans, although they consult their idols and mediums and oracles and familiar spirits. And I will hand Egypt over into the hand of a cruel master, that is, Antichrist, even a stern king, that is, Antichrist, who will rule over them, says the Lord God of hosts. Isaiah 19:2 through 4. In the second grouping we find only 2 subdivisions, Gomer and the house of Togarmah. That is because these 2 sons of Japheth represent the twin pillars of the beast's power during the first half of the tribulation, the west from whence he sprang, and which until only just recently was dominated by the now destroyed Babylon, and the north, that is, the first 7 kingdoms of Rome, overpowered in the early days of the tribulation. Gomer and Togarmah, often taken to be the Cimmerians dwelling in the terra incognita of the northern steppes and the somewhat less remote Armenians, thus represent from the biblical perspective the more and the less exotic quadrants of the world respectively, namely the in Ezekiel's time unknown west and the somewhat less mysterious north. With the addition of the final element in verse 6, a host of allied nations with you, O Gog, we have a reference to the last of the world's 4 quadrants, the East, now brought into this final conflict by specific divine facilitation represented by the drying up of the Euphrates to prepare the way for the kings of the East at Revelation 16:12 in the 6th bowl judgment, Armageddon. In the clearest possible terms his contemporaries could fathom, Ezekiel has thus, through his delineation of the muster list of Antichrist demonstrated through the Spirit, that this mobilization will be worldwide in its scope and massive in its implementation. Many days from now you and your forces will be mustered. At the end of the years, that is, at the end of the 6,000 years of human history just prior to Armageddon, you will come to a land restored from the sword, to a nation gathered out of many peoples. You will come against the mountains of Israel, which had previously been in a state of continual devastation. When you come up against the land of Israel, you will come like a cataclysm. You will be like a storm cloud and cover the land, you and all your hordes and the many peoples with you. Ezekiel 38:8 and 9. For the many reasons already delineated, that is, the list of 12 given, what is being described here is not the end of the millennium, but rather that political situation as it will obtain on the eve of Armageddon. The passage is very careful not to say that the inhabitants of the land have been regathered by the Lord. The process of this prophetically necessary pre-tribulation regathering is already far advanced in our time, of course. Further, while the situation in Israel on the brink of the beast's invasion will be one of restoration from the sword, nothing more is implied by these words than a breathing space from war and domination by others, and certainly not the much-anticipated prosperity of the millennium. The fact that the world in general and the government of Israel with her ally Babylon had imprudently anticipated Antichrist's demise as he disappeared into the darkness of the fifth bowl judgment, will merely make the short respite all the more disappointing. For the contrast between the anticipated end to the beast's rule and all the concomitant evils of the Great Tribulation will be jarring as the newfound peace and tranquility dissolves into the cataclysm of this advancing storm. Thus says the Lord God, "It will come to pass on that day that thoughts will rise in your heart, and you will devise an evil plan. For you will say, I shall go up against that land of unfortified towns and villages. I shall attack those who are at peace, all living in false security, all of them inhabiting towns and villages without defenses, literally bars and doors, that is, city gates. For you shall take plunder and take spoil and set your hand against previously desolate places, which are now inhabited, and against a people recently gathered from the nations and now in the process of acquiring livestock and property and dwelling at the center of the world. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her nobles will say to you, Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your troops to carry off silver and gold, to take their cattle and property, to take much loot?" Ezekiel 38:10-13. In no further need of the Jewish state, and eager to punish them for their unfaithfulness, Antichrist, at the behest of his father the devil, has conceived the evil plan of annihilating the Jewish race, now heavily concentrated in this single location. As at the present time, the indications are that during the tribulation, the Jewish state has continued to rely on the strategy of counterattack and mobile rather than static defenses. While generally a superior approach for a highly skilled armed force, against vastly numerically superior and equally skilled opponents attacking simultaneously from every direction, the lack of any significant fixed fortifications will be sorely felt, and as the scriptures quoted suggest, will place the Israeli army at a considerable disadvantage. We may expect that, as news of the beast's re-emergence and of his mustering of the world's armies for Armageddon reaches Israel, it will occasion a frantic effort to construct makeshift forts and entrenchments throughout the land, and especially around the capital of Jerusalem. To the rest of the world, however, the imminent demise of the Jewish state will seem certain, so that the international merchant class, represented by the traders of Sheba, Dedan, and Tarshish, noted trading nations of Ezekiel's day, representing from their relative geography vis-à-vis Israel, the mercantile interests of the south, west, and north respectively, will be looking forward to the opportunity of trafficking in what promises to be a wholesale liquidation of all property within the borders of the Jewish state, just as soon as Antichrist's mission is accomplished. The eagerness visible in the verses given is no doubt accentuated by the fact that the 7 years of tribulation have taken their toll on the world and its wealth, not to mention that their best customer, Babylon, has just recently been obliterated. But Israel, as the headquarters of the beast and his religion for the past 3 years, has benefited economically significantly more than any other nation, though that benefit has come at the extremely high cost of having to experience the presence of Antichrist and his anti-God rule more directly than any other nation. Therefore prophesy, Son of Man, and say to Gog, Thus says the Lord God, On that day when my people are living in false security, will you not realize it? For you will come from your place, from the far north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding horses, a huge multitude and a vast army. And I will bring you up against my people Israel like a cloud covering the earth. At the end of days, that is, in the last days, the tribulation, it will come to pass that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, that is, understand who I am, when I show forth my holiness in their sight by destroying you, O Gog. Ezekiel 38:14-16. Finally, it should also be pointed out here that the essential strategy of Armageddon has been developed by Satan, and that Israel is really not so much the target as she is the bait, for it is the true essence of the devil's mad plan to force the issue in one place and at one time, in a final confrontation of all the forces he can muster, human and angelic, with the Lord himself, Revelation 16:14. But of course the entirety of all creature effort is a laughable pittance in the face of the least expression of divine power. Just as the Lord raised up Pharaoh for the very purpose of displaying his power and proclaiming his name, Exodus 9:16, so all the devil's efforts through the mobilization of more human might than has ever been deployed in one place in world history will only serve to show forth my holiness in their sight by destroying you, O Gog. Ezekiel 38:16.